So, Dan, this is a wild story. The entire Democratic state party was pretty much replaced with Democratic Socialists of America candidates, clean slate, straight across. And in response, the establishment Democrats that were holding those positions before, and the staff, the actual staff that works for the Democratic state party, resigned. So this is just crazy to me that they would throw that kind of a temper tantrum, especially given that they were running as a unity ticket, which was even in the name of the slate, right? Progressive Unity or something of this. What's actually happening here?
Yeah, I think one of the stories about all this in this whole conversation is that up until this Saturday, the 6th, as much as the establishment, as much as sort of the body politic in Nevada would say, oh, we anticipated this happening, we thought this would happen. The reality is, on the ground, that simply wasn't the case. Every major elected official in the state of Nevada had backed this, what they called the unity ticket. And I mean, all the way up to, literally, there is no elected official in the state of Nevada who backed the progressive slate. There wasn't a single one.
Wow.
Everyone choosing to back who was already a very progressive candidate. I mean, let's be honest, either candidate was a Democratic Socialist, but what was really clear was that as the progressive wave, which started in 2016, then grew legs in 2018 when Amy Villela ran for Congress in Nevada, and then further grew legs in 2020 when Bernie absolutely decimated the Biden ticket in Nevada. And did what many people said was impossible, which was to win Nevada.
He won it by a landslide. I was there. It was amazing.
Yeah, in some instances 2-1, which was just incredible. And then we saw this sort of circular, motion by the Democratic establishment to essentially, let's not say essentially, every other party their phone calls were made, things happened, and they really focused their energy and effort around Biden. Similarly, what you have in Nevada is a party establishment which is run through the state organization. And I think we are all involved in politics a lot, so it's easy to get myopic when we look at this, but I think let's think of it as a voter in Nevada. If you're a registered Democrat, the Nevada State Democratic Party is from a brand perspective, what you think of as representing you in the state that you live in. It's the state party of your state, ideologically, your values. And so a lot of people in their first sort of gut instinct is to just believe the party and to sort of say like, yeah, this is my team. They're on my side. And so that's sort of been what it has been for the last few years. At any rate, after this massive sort of unexpected, I shouldn't say unexpected, after this massive, well-deserved, well-earned victory in the caucus, a lot of the pieces of that organizing that happened in Nevada still remained with the goal of moving the needle forward. Mm-hmm. And so you had that infrastructure actively participating in local politics, getting on the boards, doing everything that the party will always tell you. When you try to make change in the Democratic Party, they will always say, there's a way that we do this. Hey, slow down. You got to understand this is a private organization. Mm-hmm. You got to follow the rules. You got to show up at the meetings. You got to put in the time. You got to make the phone calls. And so, the crew at Left Caucus, the crew at the Las Vegas Democratic Socialists, they did the work over a period of 2 years to show up to the meetings, to get people engaged. While I will note, also building not one of the most effective community aid organizations in Southern Nevada. So you're doing all this sort of political machinery in the background while having this true benefit of mutual aid, which, for example, in the pandemic, Las Vegas DSA organized hundreds, actually thousands of deliveries of food when people are really suffering. They developed a mutual aid fund where we were able to provide funds for people who are struggling, things our own local elected officials struggled to do. And continues to build this network, this diverse, broad group of people. And so where that all came to a head after the presidential election, which is another pause point, where learning from the lessons of 2016, the progressive activists this time said, no, we are not going to make this a conversation of, the very, very left versus the establishment. There's a goal ahead of us, which is to win the presidential election. And so in spite of being challenged, sort of, kicked to the curb in some instances, all of those progressive activists in Nevada and really around the country showed up, and we got Joe Biden elected, and then we showed up again, and then we got 2 senators elected, and we took control of the Senate, and we owned up to that part of that agreement, right? We did the work on the ground. So lo and behold,
and the establishment didn't seem to appreciate that, did they?
Or even recognize it,
which is crazy to me.
Still, yeah, I mean, we're still seeing some of the sort of toxic conversation that's often lobbed at the very, very progressive end of the party around, calling people Bernie bros is just that classic line, or talk in Nevada. Anytime there's a conversation about progressive activism, somehow this conversation about violent Bernie Sanders supporters throwing chairs in 2016 comes up, and it's just absurd.
It's absurd. It didn't happen. Why is that story still being propagated? And in fact, a local journalist, is it Ralston report?
Yeah.
He had a scathing report this week on the progressives, and he was trying to poo-poo this win that you just had, and saying that was the end of the Democratic Party in the state of Nevada. I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever read. If anything, the opposite is true. I've never seen such engagement as I did last year during the primary. The fact that Bernie Sanders absolutely swept that, and I had spent the whole week there. I had been at several of his functions. I had attended many other presidential caucus issues that were going on that week. I interviewed Tom Steyer, so it wasn't just Bernie I was covering, but there was absolutely the largest groundswell of progressive voters I have ever seen anywhere. So for him to just completely act as if that didn't happen is absolutely insane. If anything, the DSA and Left Caucus, et cetera, have brought more people into the Nevada State Democratic Party. They've brought voters in, voters that might have gone to Republicans because they're hurting financially.
Yeah. Brought in and let's give credit where credit is due. Judith Whitmer, the new head of the Nevada State Democratic Party, absolutely did the groundwork.
Yeah.
Brought in a diverse and when you say bringing in voters, it's a lot more complicated than just telling someone to go show up and vote on election day. It's all of the logistics of getting them energized. Do you know where to go vote? Do you know how to? Can you drive someone? Can you bring someone? All of those things happened really without credit. And again, like, up until Saturday at about 2 p.m., I really do not believe anyone in the establishment, in spite of the financial mechanisms that they were doing as an emergency break, really thought that this would happen. It was a very interesting vote. But what's also interesting is, I mean, you mentioned John Ralston. John Ralston, the quote political expert of Nevada, said that Saturday was going to be this bloodbath. He said it was just going to be a bloodbath. It's going to be embarrassing. That there was no chance this was going to happen. I'm paraphrasing him, of course, but he set the narrative that this was impossible. Lo and behold, the activists showed up, led by Judith in an amazing progressive slate, and they won the ticket. And I guess what I would say there to that argument is, when the Democratic establishment has said you got to show up, you got to do the meetings, you got to put in the time, make the phone calls, send the text messages, I want to acknowledge that Left Caucus, DSA, under Judith's leadership, and a lot of other great people, Amy Villela, Amy's former campaign manager, Keenan Court, they all did that work, and it had an amazing payoff. And we will look back at what happened on March 6th in 20 years or 30 years from now. And because you often talk about the Democratic Convention in 1968. That's a huge moment. Change power structure, change political structure. People will look back at when the Democratic Socialists took control of the state party in Nevada as a profound and formative moment in American politics. And it's profoundly because it is a group of people who do not have access to political power structure, who do not have access to the kind of corporations who can write a $250,000 check to a PAC, and who do not have access to what we in Nevada refer to as the Reid machine, this former network of campaign staffers from Harry Reid. They did it without that. They did it with people who have, who are struggling, people who are looking for jobs right now, people who have their own troubles that they go to when they're done with that meeting on Saturday. And it's a really great story. It's a model for what's going to happen if the left has courage, which I believe we do, to move the needle forward politically.
And interestingly enough, some of the ex-Reid employees were also work for the Bernie Sanders campaign. So some of those folks weren't entirely committed to the establishment, I think, even when they were working for Reid. But you're right, that is that is his old mechanism that's still been in play for many years now, and it just completely crumbled. And it's surprising to me that it's a shock, because if you've been paying attention to that wave I was talking about at the primary, going forward, it wasn't just the primary, right? The DSA was very formative in that massive win that Bernie Sanders had in the state. And I think they were also very formative in getting out the Hispanic vote, which was a massive, massive turnout that day. And it's why Bernie Sanders won. T.O. Bernie, right? Very formative.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some of the financial things that are going on, because the Democratic Party has just, the things they do with consultant money is just beyond belief to me. They take all of these donations and they funnel it usually to 5 or 6 major chunks of money to 5 or 6 consultants. There's a lot of quid pro quo that goes on. This is just a rinse, wash, repeat cycle that I've seen from the party. And this story we're talking about right now has proven to be not an exception. So they moved $450,000 into the DSCC coffers, and I believe that money is going to be used to support Catherine Cortez Masto and her reelection coming up. But that's not the only money that they moved over, right? And I also think Cortez Masto, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but did she not previously ask Whitmer to drop out of this race a few months back?
Yeah, and I think what in the view of many on the left in Nevada is that with this wave of progressive activism and the citizenry getting power where it belongs, honestly, that you have this notion when you see look what happened with AOC, right?
Right.
The AOC replaced the 3rd most powerful congressman in the United States Congress, the head of communications for the congressional Democrats. That's who AOC replaced, with a model like this. And I think when you see this kind of groundswell of activism in Nevada, I think there is a legitimate, fair concern among big ticket Democrats that when you look at a group capable of 2-1 beating Joe Biden in the primary,
right,
that is a legitimate primary threat if you're a senator or a member of Congress. And that's not, not to mention that you have one of the most popular congressional candidates on the left in the last 10 years, in Amy Vilela.
Amy's great. She's a fighter.
Yeah, waiting for that. She is a fighter, waiting for that opportunity to really, finish the work that she started of advocating for working people in this country. And it is a legitimate threat. Now, what's interesting is that Judith did commit to helping her get reelected. And I don't speak for the state party at all. But what I would tell you is that as someone who's in the activist space, I believe, and many in the left in Nevada believe, if an elected official in our state is not comfortable with delivering to the needs of the activist base, and really when we say the activist base, these are things everyone wants. When you poll time and time and time again, these are policies Americans want. Affordable living minimum wage, $15 an hour. That's just the start, by the way.
Medicare for all.
Helping their kids work. Yeah, Medicare for all.
These are policies that are popular across the board. Yeah,
Democrat, Republican. And the idea that somehow these are radical, crazy ideas, that does not immunize you from accountability just because you have the D next to your name. It doesn't. Mm-hmm. And that's maybe a conversation for another day. But I think seeing the groundswell, Catherine Cortez Masto had allegedly reached out and encouraged Tick Segerblom to run for the spot. And I think that kind of backroom power brokering was the first mistake, because it was pretty transparent.
Yeah.
And I think once it became apparent to everyone that the establishment's goal to suppress activism was to take an ally and put them in the position to sort of prevent the rest of the groundswell of activism, that was, I think, the first mistake. Right. The next mistake was in failing to really have any substantive conversation with anyone else on the other side of the ticket. And so in lieu of that conversation, activists did what they always do, which was build strength and power. Right. And we got butts in seats on those Zoom calls, and we got people to show up and have their name counted.